Russia, the world's largest country, has a history rooted in the distant past, beginning from a time when the land was not yet unified under a single banner. In the 9th century, the region we now know as Russia was a fragmented collection of warring tribes and principalities, each vying for control over the vast and fertile plains of Eastern Europe. The origins of Russia can be traced back to these early days, when the region was inhabited by a variety of tribes, including the Scythians, the Goths, and the Huns, tribes that played pivotal roles in shaping the future of Europe. During this time, the region was primarily dominated by these nomadic tribes, whose influence stretched far beyond the borders of what would later become Russia. The most significant of these early powers were the Vikings, also known as the Norsemen. The Vikings' presence in Eastern Europe is often overshadowed by their raids on Western Europe, but they were also heavily involved in the region's development. These Norse explorers navigated the great rivers, such as the Volga, Dnieper, and Don, settling along their banks and establishing small city-states like Kiev and Novgorod. These Viking settlers, known as the Rus, eventually merged with the Slavic populations they encountered, forming a unique cultural and political identity that laid the groundwork for the future Russian state. By the 10th century, the Kievan Rus, a federation of Slavic tribes led by Viking rulers, emerged as a dominant power in the region. This early state served as the foundation for what would become Russia, with Kiev as its capital and a series of Slavic kings, or grand princes, at its helm. The Kievan Rus reached its zenith in the 11th and 12th centuries, expanding its influence over neighboring lands. However, its prosperity was short-lived. In the 13th century, the Mongol invasion would change the course of Russian history. Despite these challenges, the remnants of the Kievan Rus would eventually give rise to new powers, including the Duchy of Muscovy, which would later play a pivotal role in the formation of the Russian Empire. By the 13th century, the once prosperous Kievan Rus state had been ravaged by the Mongol invasion, led by Genghis Khan's descendants. This period of Mongol dominance, known as the Mongol yoke, lasted for nearly 2 centuries and greatly shaped the development of the Russian state. The Mongols, with their powerful and brutal military tactics, swept across Eastern Europe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Kiev, the heart of the Kievan Rus, was sacked in 1240, and its lands were incorporated into the vast Mongol Empire as part of the Golden Horde. While much of the southern and central Rus territories fell under Mongol control, the northern principalities, including Muscovy, managed to retain some degree of independence. Muscovy, a small principality situated along the Volga River, was relatively untouched by the Mongol invasion, although it still had to pay tribute to the Golden Horde. This tribute system allowed Muscovy to survive and slowly gain power, while the Mongols consolidated their grip on much of the rest of Russia. During this time, Muscovy's princes began to carve out a greater role for themselves in the Russian political landscape. The first significant ruler of Muscovy was Ivan I, also known as Ivan Kalita, who reigned from 1325 to 1340. Ivan I was a shrewd leader who not only expanded the territory of Muscovy, but also played a crucial role in consolidating power by acting as a mediator between the Mongol overlords and other Russian principalities. His political acumen enabled Muscovy to become the preeminent power in northeastern Russia. However, it was under Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, that Muscovy truly began to emerge as the dominant force in the region. Ivan III, who ruled from 1462 to 1505, refused to acknowledge the Mongol yoke and took bold steps to assert Muscovy's independence. In 1480, he famously stood firm against the Mongol Khan, effectively ending the Mongol influence over Russia. This marked a turning point in Russian history, as Ivan III laid the foundations for the rise of the Russian Empire. Ivan III's reign also saw the annexation of several key territories, including Novgorod and Tver, which expanded Muscovy's borders and increased its power. He also strengthened the centralized authority of the Grand Prince, making Muscovy a more unified and centralized state. His marriage to Sophia Paleolog, the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, further solidified Muscovy's aspirations to become the successor of the fallen Byzantine Empire, a title that would later be claimed by his grandson, Ivan IV. The rise of Muscovy culminated in the reign of Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, who ruled from 1547 to 1584. Ivan IV's reign marked the transition from a medieval principality to a centralized, expansive empire. His ascension to the throne was a pivotal moment in Russian history, as he declared himself the first Tsar, or Tsar, of all Russia, a title that underscored his absolute power and aspirations to lead a unified and powerful Russian state. Ivan the Terrible's early reign was marked by reforms that strengthened the central government and expanded Muscovy's influence. He introduced a new legal code, restructured the military, and sought to eliminate the power of the old aristocratic families, which he saw as a threat to his authority. These reforms were part of his broader vision to consolidate power and establish a more autocratic rule, a theme that would define his later years. However, Ivan IV's rule took a darker turn as he grew increasingly paranoid and ruthless. In 1565, he established the Oprichnina, a state-sponsored system of terror that targeted suspected traitors, including nobility and clergy. The Oprichnina, with its notorious secret police and mass executions, instilled fear across Russia, and many of the Tsar's reforms were overshadowed by his increasingly erratic and brutal behavior. His violence and cruelty earned him the moniker Ivan the Terrible, a title that reflected not only his military conquests, but also his reign of terror at home. Despite his internal conflicts and paranoia, Ivan the Terrible expanded Russia's territory significantly. His military campaigns in the east and south brought new lands into the Russian fold, including the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. These victories were pivotal in securing control over the Volga River and opening up the vast, resource-rich regions of Siberia for future Russian expansion. The conquest of the Kazan Khanate, in particular, was seen as a crucial step in solidifying Russian dominance over the region, as it provided access to key trade routes and fortified Russia's position as a regional power. Ivan's territorial expansion did not stop at the Volga River. He also launched several campaigns to the east, sending expeditions into the Siberian wilderness. It was during Ivan IV's reign that Russian explorers and Cossacks began to venture further into the uncharted lands of Siberia, laying the groundwork for the eventual colonization of the vast, sparsely populated region. The conquest of Siberia would continue for centuries, transforming Russia into one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Despite the military successes, Ivan the Terrible's reign ended on a tragic note. His erratic behavior and harsh treatment of the nobility created widespread instability, and his later years were marked by personal tragedy, including the death of his beloved son, which led to a period of political instability and succession crises. After the tumultuous reign of Ivan the Terrible, Russia entered a period of political instability known as the Time of Troubles. Following Ivan's death, Russia faced a power vacuum, as various factions vied for control, and the country was plagued by famine, foreign invasions, and a lack of a strong leader. However, this crisis was eventually resolved with the rise of the Romanov dynasty in 1613. The Romanovs would rule Russia for over 3 centuries, during which the country would solidify its position as one of the most powerful empires in the world. The Romanovs' ascent to power was largely due to the election of Michael Romanov as Tsar in 1613, marking the end of the time of troubles and the beginning of a new era for Russia. Michael and his successors, including his son Alexis, gradually restored stability and expanded the Russian state. Under the Romanovs, Russia embarked on a series of ambitious reforms and territorial expansions that would shape its future. One of the most transformative figures in Russian history was Peter I, better known as Peter the Great, who reigned from 1682 to 1725. Peter was determined to modernize Russia and make it competitive with the great powers of Europe. His reforms were sweeping, focusing on every aspect of Russian society, from the military to culture and education. Peter traveled extensively across Europe to learn about Western technology and governance, and upon his return, he implemented a series of reforms designed to bring Russia into the modern age. Peter the Great's most notable achievement was the establishment of St. Petersburg, a new capital on the shores of the Baltic Sea. This city was not only a symbol of Russia's new direction, but also a strategic move to gain access to the vital warm-water ports of the Baltic, which had been a long-standing goal of Russian foreign policy. The construction of St. Petersburg was a monumental task, and it came at a great human cost, as thousands of workers died in the process. However, it was a symbol of Russia's emerging imperial power and its desire to be seen as a European power. Peter's military campaigns were equally ambitious. He waged the Great Northern War against Sweden from 1700 to 1721, which resulted in Russia's victory and the acquisition of crucial territories around the Baltic Sea, including parts of modern-day Estonia and Latvia. With this victory, Peter secured Russia's place as a major European power, and the Russian Empire began to take shape. The expansionist policies of Peter the Great continued throughout the 18th century under the leadership of his successors, most notably Catherine the Great. Catherine, who reigned from 1762 to 1796, is often regarded as one of Russia's greatest rulers. Like Peter, Catherine sought to expand Russian territory, particularly to the south, around the Black Sea. She fought several wars against the Ottoman Empire, eventually gaining control of Crimea and other territories in the Black Sea region. Catherine's reign also marked a period of cultural and intellectual flourishing as she sought to modernize Russian society and strengthen the monarchy. By the 19th century, Russia had become one of the largest empires in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Europe. However, the empire was not without its challenges. The vast size of the empire created logistical problems, and the sheer number of ethnic groups and cultures within its borders made governance difficult. Despite these challenges, Russia remained a formidable power, particularly during the Napoleonic Wars, where the Russian Empire played a key role in the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Russia's status as an imperial power began to face increasing internal pressure. Economic inequality, political repression, and social unrest led to growing discontent among the population. This discontent would eventually result in the Russian Revolution of 1917, which led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and the fall of the Romanov dynasty. The subsequent rise of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Russian Empire and the beginning of a new chapter in Russian history, one dominated by communism and the Soviet state.